Hello and welcome to our final book break of 2020. For Greece Public Library, I am librarian Kirstra. I moderate our Pints and Prose book discussion group as well as the virtual science fiction and fantasy book discussion group. And as always, I am here with my delightful colleague, Claire.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Claire, and I moderate historical fiction on Facebook and also As the Page Turns here at the library. Well, on Zoom now at the library.
Right, through the library, yeah. So we are so excited, as I'm sure most of you are, that 2020 is like almost in the rearview mirror. And I think really the only good thing about 2020 has been books. I don't know whether you feel the same, Claire, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Books and gratitude for family, nature, but definitely absolutely. A great reading year for me.
Yeah, for sure. So today we are going to each bring you our top 5 books of 2020. And because we both use slightly different criteria to choose what that means, I'm going to let Claire go first and talk about just sort of how her decision process worked, and then I'll go through mine when it's my turn.
Okay. I keep track of all my books, both in my journal and my Goodreads. So I kind of started skimming through to see what stood out for me this year. And then I broke mine down into categories for you. So like mystery, fantasy, historical fiction, memoir, some of the categories that I enjoy reading. So, and then I had to throw in some honorable mentions because I just had too many good books this year.
There were some really good books this year, for sure. So I also am a Goodreads user. It's really the only way that I found that works for me to keep track of what I'm reading. And I think I read more in 2020 than maybe I ever have before, at least in my adult life. So I started there also. I kind of made a list of all of my 5-star books that I read in 2020, and then had to go back and filter by what was published in 2020. So I think both of us use that as a narrowing factor, right? So
yes, I forgot to mention that all of these were published in
2020. Perfect. So after that, I had kind of a longish list. So I was trying to figure out how to whittle it down. And what I ended up settling on was books that stood out to me or that like stayed with me.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you read a book and you're like, that was a good book. I really liked that book. But then there are others that you're like, that was a really good book. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a long time. So those are the ones that I tried to choose. With the exception, I did want to throw in at least one nonfiction book. And I realized that of the kind of smallish amount of nonfiction that I read this year, that's one of my goals for next year, is to read more nonfiction. Only one had been published in 2020. So that was my best 2020 nonfiction. So I'll be talking about that one.
All right.
Do you want to start with your first pick, Claire?
Sure. I think I'll start with my first fantasy pick, which is something that I told you about earlier this year, but it's called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And one of the things that you mentioned is what stood out to me is I'd like to read more by this author just because I like this one so much. So this is a kaleidoscope adventure of traveling through time, a deal with the devil, and finding love. So it's unique in the fact that you follow this one character all the way through her 300 some years of life as she tries to outwit the devil, find love, and it's just so cleverly written and didn't feel, I don't know, it really stood out to me, and I thought about it a lot, like you said. So that's my first one, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Nice. Yeah, and that one has been on my list since you talked about it, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm definitely gonna read that one. So I will also, this was a big year for fantasy for me. I've always been a fantasy and science fiction reader, but I haven't been reading as much of it lately. Until 2020, I was like, this is my year, and I really got after it. So my standout fantasy for 2020 is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. And so I'm cheating just a little bit here because I read this book this year. It was published in 2020. See, it's still new. But it is book 2 in a series, in a trilogy. So what I really am going to talk mostly about is Gideon the Ninth, which is the first book in the trilogy. I have never read a book like this in my life. There are necromancers and magic and like a haunted palace in space. And
Wow.
It's a lot, and it is completely bonkers, and I loved it. It's swashbuckling, and there's mystery, and a little bit of romance thrown in, but it's a completely new and different world with different rules, and it is just fantastic. It is a wild ride. So I read this one all the way through. I loved it. Picked up book 2 as soon as it came out, tore through it in just a couple of days, and now I'm like, wait, I have to go back and read number 1 again, and then read number 2 again, because they're so densely plotted that I know I missed things because there was a gap in between the books. So Tamsin Muir, Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, and the 3rd book in the trilogy is due out in 2021. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, you know, I like my historical fiction. So I kind of had a tie. And one of the books, I'll do my first one, is The Mountains Sing. And Nguyen Phan K Mai, I think is her name. And I did this one for the historical fiction group on Facebook. And it was a totally unique portrayal of Vietnam that you don't get to see, from a one family and what they journey throughout their lives. It's published by an independent press, Algonquin Press, and it was just a beautiful, moving family saga. I think I talked about this one once before, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I really, you know, at first I was not enthused about, like, oh, Vietnam, I don't know, not a happy time, but it really just brought so much to the table. Debut author. I believe she wrote poetry before, but this was her first novel in English, and it was really, really wonderful. My second one is a sophomore book by Britt Bennett called The Vanishing Half. This was in my pile of shame, so go Claire, get rid of that pile of shame. And this was awesome. It was about a set of twins, and they are born into a town that is in Louisiana of all the descendants of very light-skinned Black people. And they develop this unique culture in the town where that light skin is prized. So it's unusual. It has a lot of themes of racism and how it affects different layers of society. And ultimately, the twins run away from the town, and one marries a very Black man, has a child. The other passes for white and marries a white man. And it's how their lives differ and then kind of come back and forth down the ages. Because they were twins, they had a bond. And the one twin in particular misses her sister desperately and is trying to find her because she has pretty much left their whole culture, left their family, and moved on to this new and different life. Of course, they both have children, and that is how they eventually come back together, in a sense. So it was a really good read. I could see this being a fantastic book club choice. It makes me want to read Britt Bennett's other book, which is called The Mothers, which I tried unsuccessfully to get As the Page Turns to read. And maybe they'll listen to me now. But this was a fantastic book on a lot of lists, and I can see why. Just great writing, really deep characterizations, and just a unique perspective. So.
Nice. Yeah, that one's been on my list too. Sounds really interesting. Very cool. So I actually have a historical fiction too.
Oh, go
By
Kirstra.
accident. I know. And it's one that I have talked about before, and that is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. So this was the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction winner. It is, so the main characters are in, why have I lost all of my words?
School for boys.
Juvenile detention. Yes, a correctional school for boys, essentially, which is nicknamed Nickel, which is why they're the Nickel Boys. It is a lovely, lovely book about some really tough subject matter. So it's beautiful, but it's tough. But I really loved it. Like I said, it really stuck with me this year. And I think actually both of our book clubs are reading this one this year for Black History Month in February. So if you're interested in reading and discussing, we're actually doing a joint Zoom book discussion with As the Page Turns and Pints and Prose to talk about the Nickel Boys in February. So
I'm looking forward to that one. I actually have a copy of that book and I've held off just so I can read it and be fresh. But
yeah, it's really good. And that one I listened to on audio, and the audio version was excellent.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So my next one is nonfiction. Again, I'm just going to throw in my honorable mention here as well, because I haven't finished it yet, but I know I like it. But the first one I've talked about before, it was the Rural Diaries by Hilary Burton Morgan, who is married to
Jeffrey Dean Morgan
on The Walking Dead, which I don't watch a lot of TV, so I've never seen that show.
Or Grey's Anatomy. He was on Grey's Anatomy.
I think they were both on Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, okay.
And she was also on, I think, One Tree Hill or something. Yeah, but it was just so interesting to me because this couple met, had a kind of a long distance thing in a short time, decided they both really wanted the same things out of life, which was to really avoid that whole Hollywood scene. So they bought a farm in upstate New York, really started to help the town kind of revitalize. They bought a candy store. I really want to go to this town. I know one of our staff members, Laura Beth, went. So after COVID, I'm going to try to like suck her into going with me to visit.
So look, there is a huge, it's Rhinebeck, New York, and there is a huge yarn festival there every year. So post-COVID.
Oh, okay. You got me.
I would totally go.
Yeah. We'll go visit the yarn and the candy store.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, it's really cute. And I don't know, I just really liked it. And I liked the way she wrote. She was very real without feeling like, sometimes you read these things and they feel like a slander gossip sheet, but this was, I just felt she was more genuine. So that was one. The other one, which I've just started reading, is called Vesper Flights by Helen MacDonald, who wrote H for Hawk, which I read. That I felt like was more of a personal journey of her training a raptor and her journey with like depression. This one, if you are any kind of a naturalist or environmentalist or concerned about nature and the environment, it's just a wonderful collection of essays addressing that, about habitat loss, about just the world. One of the things that struck me as one of the sentences is the world has lost half of its wildlife in my own lifetime. And she's not that old, people. So just what happens when habitats are extinguished, and it just really is, I'm loving it. And it's the type of thing I have to read and savor, so I can only read like a couple of them at a time. And I almost didn't want to talk about it because I don't want somebody putting this on hold and taking it away from me. But I do think it's on Hoopla.
Well, there you go.
I can't remember if the ebook or the e-audiobook is on Hoopla, but it is, something is on Hoopla. So I guess if someone does, I'll just have to read or listen there. So
yeah, absolutely. Nice. So now would be a good time to talk about my 2020 nonfiction book.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't know how this happened. Now, I will say I read a couple of fantastic nonfiction books that I realized came out right at the end of 2019.
Yeah.
So Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow and Say Nothing by the author whose name I totally forget, but about the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
Oh, that's
Both
right. Yeah.
amazing nonfiction books. The one, but published in 2019, and the one that I read from 2020 was also very good. Maybe just not quite as like serious nonfiction, but it is Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. So collection of personal essays, wildly funny, extremely irreverent, often profane, but very, very funny. And like just the thing that I needed towards the end of 2020. Very, very funny. So I'm not sad that this is my only one. But Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby wins the prize for my 2020 book read.
Awesome.
Nonfiction.
All right, I've got myself all out of order, but you know me, I love mysteries too. So my best mystery, and I had a hard time deciding this, is Anne Cleeve's The Darkest Evening. This was the newest Vera Stanhope novel. Okay, people, I am like diving into Vera. I don't know why, I just love it. But I'm watching it now, and I think maybe that's kind of led me into this. But it also made me want to read her other books. So I love the Shetland series. I need to read those books, but she's going to have her newest one, which was what, The Long Yard or something. That is also going to be turned into a series by the same company that is doing both Shetland and Vera.
Well, but,
this is a great winter novel if you're like stuck inside, really just want a good British mystery. I highly recommend Anne Cleeve's and either the Vera Stanhope or the Shetland.
Yeah.
I've kind of read them out of order, and now I feel like I need to read them in order. So
yeah, I've also watched both of those series and really enjoyed them. So it's the same. I'm kind of waiting for like vacation or something where I have a chunk of time that I can just tear through a bunch of them.
Right.
But yeah, those are all on my list too. I didn't have a mystery in my selection, so I'm just gonna pick my next one. And both of the rest of my books I have discussed before, so I'm not gonna get into too much detail, but the next one that I picked was Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. This was such a weird little book. It is almost like a fairy tale. There's some magical realism at play. The time period is very indistinct, but it deals with a young girl who lives with her father in a cabin in the woods, and they are healers, almost like the witches that live in the cottage, right? That people will go to for help.
Yeah, I actually read this one too after you talked about it. So,
and it is the closest sort of analogy is like a modern fairy tale from the point of view of the monster.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was weird and again very different from anything else I had read. And it's a short, wee little book, but it has really just stayed with me. The imagery and the writing and a little bit of the, what did I just read? But in like the best possible way. So if you're looking for something different, Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford.
Okay. I also talked about this one, but it stayed with me. Migrations by Charlotte McGonaghy. And everybody knows how I love birds. Well, if you don't, you know now. And this one, a woman is following a group of Arctic terns. And it's at some indeterminate point in the future, but most of nature, including all birds and everything, is dying off. So this is a landmark journey, and you can tell that the protagonist has definite issues. So it's kind of a story of the lost turns, what happened to her in her life to get her to this point. She hitches a ride on a fishing boat who is trying to go for that last catch because, of course, there's no fish left either. And they're kind of like this sea captain and her have their own agendas. He wants one last catch, feels the birds will lead him. She's looking for the birds to honor kind of her husband's search because he was a professor. So very interesting, loved it. It says, you know, one of the things extraordinary was written by Amy St. John Mandel, author of Station 11. So if you like Station 11 or that kind of book, it has that same feel, that mystical kind of futuristic, worldly feel.
All right. Yeah. Gonna have to put that one on my list too. So my last choice is, it's such a good book, and another kind of difficult book, but it is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So I talked about this one before. It is a story told in 2 time periods about Vanessa Y. In the year 2000, she is a 16-year-old. She goes to a boarding school in Maine, and she becomes involved in a relationship with one of her teachers. And then we have another timeline in 2017, at which point Vanessa is a grown-up. She's out on her own. And the teacher with whom she had this relationship has come under new accusations of abuse, essentially, sexual impropriety with students. And what the book really is about is a trauma survivor grappling with how to deal with her trauma, and kind of where the line is between consent and abuse and agency. And Vanessa remembers this relationship from her youth as something that she was actively participating in, that she wanted, and she kind of needs to believe that she wasn't abused, that she wasn't a victim, to kind of keep a hold of herself in the present. So it's her grappling with that history and trying to come to terms with her past. Again, there is some dark subject matter in this one, but it is just beautifully written, and it is unflinching, and the author is not afraid to go to dark places and shine a light on them, which I think is the important thing. Like, there is that light being shined. She's not just, it's not prurient, you know,
Right.
It's not
voyeurism.
lecherous. Right. Exactly. Yeah. This is not that, but it was really powerful. And again, it's another one that really has stuck with me. So that was my last.
I knew this would happen. It's popping off.
I know, they're not very comfortable, our little headgears, but that's all right. Did you get to all of your honorable mentions, or do you have
the last one I had was American Dirt, which I know was a controversial book this year. But the one reason I put it on there is because I felt it made me research what really happens as far as immigration and the whole train going to El Norte. So my book group is going to discuss this at some point in the future. I can't remember which month, but it stayed with me for better or worse. You know, so that was it. That was my last one. But yeah, if you want to find us on Goodreads, use Goodreads. I highly encourage it to keep track of your books.
Yeah, for sure.
It was the best year I had in a while. Not my best ever, but I think I was up there.
Yeah. So we also have, I meant to bring a copy in and I forgot, we also have available in the library right now our 2020 staff picks. So that little pamphlet includes books from across our staff, not just the two of us. So if you're looking for some other recommendations for recent books, I highly recommend you pick one of those up. There's a lot of different stuff in there, fiction and nonfiction. Yeah, so that's what we've got. We'd love to hear whether you have read any of these books, what your top books of 2020 were. Please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what y'all are reading too. And then we will actually be back next week. I'm pretty sure it's next week.
I think it is.
I think it is next week because it's such a short gap. In the new year, and we're going to be sort of previewing 2021, talking about big titles that are forthcoming, and maybe what our own goals are as far as reading in 2021.
Yeah,
so,
lots of surprises, lots of things
yes,
to look forward to.
Absolutely, for sure. So for Greece Public Library, I'm Kirstra with Claire, and we would both like to say Happy New Year! And we will see you again in 2021. Thanks, everybody.